The first gunshot shattered the morning calm of the Israeli military base cafe. Noa Goldstein looked up from the espresso machine, her blue eyes instantly shifting from innocent barista to something far more dangerous. 6 armed terrorists had just burst through the entrance, weapons raised, shouting commands in Arabic. The soldiers around her dove for cover, spilling coffee and scrambling for weapons they didn't have. But Noa? She smiled. What the terrorists didn't know was that the gorgeous blonde barista they had planned to use as a hostage was Lieutenant Noa Goldstein of Sayeret Matkal, Israel's most elite special forces unit. And what the soldiers who had been ignoring her for months were about to discover was that their pretty coffee girl was the deadliest person in the room. Welcome to Silent Heroes Stories. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where in the world are you watching from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button. For 6 months, Lieutenant Noa Goldstein had been the most invisible person on the Israeli military base. Not because she tried to hide, quite the opposite. At 27, with platinum blonde hair that caught sunlight like spun gold and blue eyes that could stop traffic, she was impossible to miss. But to the soldiers who frequented the base cafe, she might as well have been furniture that happened to serve exceptional coffee. Every morning at 0600 hours, Noa would arrive at the cafe in her fitted civilian clothes, looking more like a model heading to a photo shoot than someone reporting for duty. She would tie her hair back in a loose ponytail, put on her apron, and transform into exactly what everyone expected to see: a pretty young woman making lattes for important military personnel. "Double espresso, extra shot," barked Sergeant Major Cohen, not bothering to look up from his tactical tablet as he placed his order. Noa smiled warmly, her Hebrew, carrying just enough of an accent to suggest she wasn't native-born Israeli, which was true, though not in the way anyone assumed. "Coming right up," she replied, her voice soft and accommodating. As she worked the espresso machine, Cohen discussed classified patrol routes with his lieutenant, their voices carrying clearly over the gentle hiss of steaming milk. Range schedules, weak points in perimeter security, upcoming VIP visits, information that would be worth millions to Israel's enemies. Information that was perfectly safe because they were discussing it in front of the harmless barista. What Cohen and his colleagues didn't know was that the woman preparing their coffee held advanced degrees in Middle Eastern strategic studies and applied linguistics from Tel Aviv University. They couldn't see the surgical scars on her hands from where shrapnel had torn through her fingers during a night raid in Gaza. They had no idea that she spoke 7 languages fluently and could kill a man in 12 different ways using only items found behind a coffee counter. Most importantly, they would never suspect that their morning caffeine routine was actually the most sophisticated intelligence-gathering operation ever conducted on Israeli soil. Noa had been handpicked for this assignment by the highest levels of Israeli intelligence. Her cover identity was a masterpiece of misdirection. Young enough to be dismissed as inexperienced, beautiful enough to be categorized as decorative, and foreign enough, her cover story claimed Polish ancestry, to be assumed non-threatening to operational security. The reality was far different. Before becoming a barista, Lieutenant Noa Goldstein had completed the most grueling special forces training in the world. She had served 3 tours in active combat zones, earned 2 decorations for valor under fire, and had been personally selected for Sayeret Matkal, Israel's most elite unit, at the unprecedented age of 24. Her mission at this base was simple in concept, but complex in execution. Identify and neutralize a terrorist cell that intelligence suggested had infiltrated the facility. For months she had served coffee while cataloging every face, every conversation, every deviation from normal routine. Her photographic memory and tactical training allowed her to compile threat assessments that had already prevented 2 attacks on civilian targets. But this morning would be different. As she handed Sergeant Major Cohen his espresso, Noa noticed something that made her blood run cold. 3 new faces at the corner table, Men who claimed to be maintenance contractors but whose body language screamed military training. Their eyes moved too systematically, their positions too tactical, their casual conversation too rehearsed. And in the reflection of the espresso machine's polished surface, she could see the outline of concealed weapons beneath their civilian clothes. The attack was beginning. Noa's training had taught her that the difference between life and death often came down to recognizing patterns that others missed. As she continued her morning routine, steaming milk and wiping down counters, her mind was already shifting into combat mode. The three men at the corner table weren't just suspicious, they were professionals. She had cataloged their positions with military precision. The dark-haired man facing the entrance was clearly the team leader, his back to the wall, eyes constantly scanning. The bearded one sat where he could observe both the kitchen entrance and the main corridor. The youngest had positioned himself with clear sight lines to the communications room down the hall. Classic Overwatch formation for a facility takeover. "Excuse me, miss," the team leader called out in accented Hebrew, his voice carrying just enough authority to sound official. "We're here for the electrical inspection. Could you show us where the main power controls are located?" Noa looked up with the same innocent smile she'd perfected over 6 months of cover operations. "Oh, I'm sorry, but I'm just the barista. You'd need to speak with Base Commander Rosen about facility access." Her voice was sweet, helpful, completely non-threatening. Exactly what they expected from a pretty civilian contractor. But even as she spoke, Noa was conducting her own inspection. The leader's boots were tactical, not maintenance issue. The calluses on the bearded man's hands were from weapons training, not electrical work. Most tellingly, all three wore their civilian clothes in a way that suggested body armor underneath, a precaution no legitimate contractor would take for routine electrical work. These weren't maintenance workers. They were assault specialists conducting final reconnaissance before an attack. "Of course," the leader replied, but his eyes had hardened slightly. "Perhaps you could direct us to Commander Rosen's office." As Noa provided directions with apparent helpfulness, she was actually activating protocols that she prayed she would never need to use. Her right hand brushed against the emergency pendant hidden beneath her uniform collar, a signal that would alert Israeli intelligence that the base was compromised. Her left hand quietly activated a hidden recording device that would capture audio evidence of the conversation. Most importantly, she was buying time to assess the full scope of the threat. The morning rush was in full swing, with nearly 30 personnel in the cafe area alone. Most were unarmed support staff grabbing breakfast before their shifts. The few combat soldiers present had sidearms but no rifle access. Weapons were stored in the armory 2 buildings away. In a sudden assault scenario, these men and women would be defenseless, unless someone with the right training was prepared to defend them. "Actually," Noa said, maintaining her bright smile, "let me make you some coffee while you wait. Commander Rosen is in the morning briefing until 0900. It's our signature blend. Ethiopian beans with just a hint of cardamom." The offer was innocent enough, but it served multiple tactical purposes. It would keep the assault team in her visual range. It would establish her as non-threatening in their assessment. And most importantly, it would position her behind the counter where her emergency equipment was hidden. As she prepared their coffee, Noa's enhanced hearing picked up fragments of whispered conversation in Arabic between the three men. Words that confirmed her worst fears. Targets, timing, and most chilling of all, no survivors. This wasn't just an intelligence-gathering mission or a targeted assassination. This was going to be a massacre. Through the cafe's large windows, Noa could see additional suspicious movement around the base perimeter. Maintenance vehicles that had appeared overnight, construction barriers that hadn't been there yesterday, personnel in hard hats who moved with military bearing rather than civilian casualness. The attack wasn't just beginning. It was already in motion. The base was being isolated, communications were likely compromised, and the 3 men in her cafe were conducting final target verification before the assault commenced. In approximately 15 minutes, when the morning briefing ended and maximum personnel were transitioning between duties, this peaceful military base would become a killing ground. Unless Lieutenant Noa Goldstein, the invisible barista, reminded everyone exactly what Sayeret Matkal operators were trained to do when civilians needed protection. The emergency pendant beneath Noa's collar had been silent for exactly 4 minutes, long enough to know that her distress signal wasn't reaching its intended recipients. Either communications were being jammed, or the terrorist cell had already compromised the base's security systems. She was on her own, exactly as her Sayeret Matkal training had prepared her to be. "Here you are, gentlemen," Noa said sweetly, placing 3 perfectly prepared coffees on a tray. Her smile was radiant as she approached their table, every step carefully calculated to appear casual, while positioning herself for maximum tactical advantage. "Ethiopian blend with cardamom, just as promised." As she leaned forward to place the cups, the team leader's hand moved instinctively toward his concealed weapon. Noa pretended not to notice, but the movement confirmed what she already knew. These men were seconds away from transitioning from reconnaissance to action. Their body language had shifted from casual observation to predatory alertness. "Thank you, beautiful," the bearded operative said in Hebrew, but his eyes weren't on her face. They were scanning the room, counting targets, calculating vectors of fire. "You've been very helpful." The emphasis on the last word made Noa's skin crawl, but her expression never changed. "Always happy to help," she replied, her voice maintaining the same cheerful tone she'd used with hundreds of soldiers over the past 6 months. "Is there anything else I can get for you while you wait?" What she was really doing was conducting her final threat assessment. Through peripheral vision, she counted 28 personnel currently in the cafe and immediate vicinity. 3 armed security guards, but their weapons were holstered, and they were focused on their breakfast rather than perimeter security. The nearest panic button was 12 steps away, too far to reach if shooting started. But behind the coffee counter, hidden in the maintenance panel that everyone assumed controlled the espresso machine's electronics, was something that no terrorist would expect to find in a base cafe: a complete tactical operations kit that could turn a barista into a one-woman army. "Actually," the team leader said, checking his watch with the precision of someone working to a timeline, "we should get started with that inspection. Safety protocols, you understand." Noa nodded sympathetically. "Of course. I hope everything checks out okay. We'd hate to have any problems with the electrical systems." She was giving them rope to hang themselves with, encouraging them to reveal more of their operational plan. But she was also buying precious seconds to prepare for what was coming. As she walked back to the counter, her fingers brushed against specific pressure points on the espresso machine's housing, a sequence that would unlock her hidden arsenal. The machine's gentle hum changed pitch almost imperceptibly as internal mechanisms shifted. To anyone listening, it sounded like normal coffee equipment cycling through its operations. In reality, it was a carefully concealed weapons cache coming online. Behind her, she heard the scrape of chairs as the 3 men stood. Through the reflection in the stainless steel backsplash, she watched them adjust their positions with military precision. The youngest moved toward the corridor that led to the communications center. The bearded one angled toward the main entrance. The leader remained central, hand now openly resting on his concealed weapon. They were about to make their move. Noa's enhanced hearing picked up the distant sound of vehicles approaching the base perimeter, the rest of the assault team moving into position. Through the windows, she could see personnel in hard hats beginning to remove construction barriers, revealing that the maintenance work had been preparation for a full-scale attack. She had perhaps 30 seconds before the shooting started. Behind the counter, hidden from view, Noa's fingers found the concealed pistol that had been waiting for this moment. A Jericho 941, chambered and ready, with 2 spare magazines taped to the mounting bracket. Enough firepower to handle 3 terrorists, but not nearly enough for what was coming next. "Ladies and gentlemen," she called out in a voice that carried clearly through the cafe, "I'm going to need everyone to move away from the windows and get behind the counter. Right now." The cheerful barista was gone. In her place stood Lieutenant Noa Goldstein, and her voice now carried the unmistakable authority of someone trained to command in life-or-death situations. The 3 terrorists realized their cover was blown at exactly the same moment that 28 unsuspecting military personnel learned that their pretty coffee girl was about to save all their lives. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying in its completeness. One moment, Noa Goldstein was the sweet barista with the radiant smile. The next, she was a Sayeret Matkal operator whose very presence changed the atmospheric pressure of the room. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the kind of authority that made hardened soldiers snap to attention without question. "Everyone get down now," she commanded, her Hebrew crisp and military precise. "Move away from windows and doors. Take cover behind solid surfaces." The 3 terrorists reacted with professional speed, hands reaching for concealed weapons, but Noa was already in motion. The Jericho 941 appeared in her grip with fluid precision as she vaulted over the coffee counter in a single graceful movement that looked more like a dance than a tactical maneuver. 6 months of playing the harmless barista had ended in one explosive second. The team leader's weapon cleared his jacket first, a compact Uzi that spoke to serious planning and professional backing. But his training had prepared him to fight soldiers, not to face a special forces operator who had been studying his every movement for the past 20 minutes. Noah's first shot took him center mass before his muzzle could find a target. The bearded operative spun toward her, his own pistol rising, but he made the fatal mistake of hesitating for a split second when he saw his target. Even in combat gear and firing stance, Noa Goldstein was still the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. That moment of cognitive dissonance, the inability to reconcile stunning beauty with lethal competence, cost him his life. Noah's second shot was a perfect double tap to center mass, delivered while moving at full speed toward cover behind the industrial coffee dispensers. Around her, the cafe had erupted into controlled chaos as military personnel followed her commands with professional precision. Tables overturned for cover, personnel calling for backup on radios, security guards drawing weapons and establishing fields of fire. The youngest terrorist had reached the corridor entrance and was raising what looked like a military-grade assault rifle. From her position behind the coffee station, Noa had an oblique angle that required mathematical precision to avoid hitting friendly personnel. She adjusted her aim by 3 degrees, compensated for the target's movement, and fired. The shot dropped him before he could engage the evacuating personnel. 3 terrorists down in under 15 seconds. But even as the immediate threats fell, Noah's training told her this was just the beginning. Through the cafe windows, she could see the real assault beginning. Armed personnel emerging from maintenance vehicles, military-grade equipment being unloaded, and what looked like enough firepower to level the entire building. "Sergeant Major Cohen," she called out, her voice cutting through the confusion. "I need you to coordinate personnel evacuation through the rear exits. Get everyone to the armory. We're going to need serious weapons for what's coming next." Cohen stared at her with the expression of a man whose entire understanding of reality had just been shattered. "Who the hell are you?" "Lieutenant Noa Goldstein, Sayeret Matkal," she replied, checking her ammunition while maintaining visual contact with the approaching threats. "And right now, I'm the only thing standing between this base and a massacre." The sound of automatic weapons fire erupted from the direction of the main gate. The real assault had begun. Through the windows, Noa could see muzzle flashes and personnel in full tactical gear advancing on the building. This wasn't a simple terrorist attack. It was a military-style operation designed to overrun the entire facility. "How many?" Cohen asked, his soldiers' training overriding his shock. "At least 20 hostiles, possibly more," Noa replied, ejecting her spent magazine and inserting a fresh one with practiced efficiency. "Professional equipment, coordinated assault pattern. This is going to get very bad, very quickly." She moved to the window, using the frame for cover while assessing the advancing force. What she saw made her blood run cold. These weren't random terrorists or even well-armed militants. They were moving with the discipline and equipment of a special forces unit, complete with communications gear, tactical vehicles, and enough firepower to punch through military defenses. Someone had sent an army to attack this base, and they had planned for every contingency except one. They hadn't planned for Lieutenant Noa Goldstein to be here. "Sergeant Major," she said, her voice calm despite the approaching storm, "I need you to get on the radio and tell command exactly what I'm about to tell you. This base is under assault by approximately 20 professional operators with military-grade equipment. They have vehicles, heavy weapons, and detailed intelligence about our defensive positions." She paused, watching as the assault force began to surround the building with tactical precision. "And tell them," she continued, "that Sayeret Matkal is about to remind everyone why we don't negotiate with terrorists. The first rocket-propelled grenade hit the cafe's eastern wall at exactly 0847 hours, turning reinforced concrete into deadly shrapnel and announcing that this was no longer a covert operation. The explosion shook the building to its foundations, but Noa had anticipated the escalation and was already moving her people to hardened positions. RPGs, military coordination, professional timing, she called out to Sergeant Major Cohen as they shepherded personnel toward the interior corridors. "This isn't terrorism. It's a military invasion disguised as an attack." Through the smoke and debris, Noa could see the assault force advancing with textbook precision. Squad-based movement, overlapping fields of fire, coordinated suppression. These operators had trained for this specific mission. What they hadn't trained for was facing someone who had spent 3 years studying exactly these tactics in Gaza and the West Bank. "Lieutenant!" Cohen shouted over the sound of automatic weapons fire that was now coming from multiple directions. "What's your assessment?" Noa pressed herself against the corridor wall, using a broken mirror to observe the hostile positions without exposing herself. 24 hostiles confirmed, possibly more in reserve. They've got the building surrounded, communications jammed, and enough firepower to level the entire structure. She paused, mentally cataloging their available resources, but they made one critical mistake. "What's that?" They assumed they were attacking a soft target with minimal resistance. Noah's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. They didn't plan for someone who knows their playbook better than they do. The sound of boots on broken glass announced that the assault team had breached the main entrance. Noa could hear them calling out in Arabic, coordinating their advance with military precision. But she could also hear something else, uncertainty in their voices as they encountered stronger resistance than expected. "Sergeant Major, I need you to get on the emergency channel and tell base command that we're implementing Protocol 7, Noa said, checking her remaining ammunition. 2 magazines plus the partial one in her weapon. Not nearly enough for what was coming. Protocol 7 doesn't exist, Cohen replied, confusion evident in his voice. It does now, Noa said grimly. It means a Sayeret Matkal operator is taking command of base defense against overwhelming odds, and command needs to authorize whatever support I request. The assault team was moving methodically through the building, clearing rooms with professional efficiency. Noa could track their progress by sound, the controlled bursts of automatic fire, the sharp commands, the systematic destruction of furniture as they searched for defenders. In her mental tactical map, she calculated their approach vectors and realized they were herding the base personnel toward the central corridor, exactly where a concentrated explosion could cause maximum casualties. This wasn't just an attack. It was a calculated massacre, designed to eliminate everyone in the building. "New plan," she announced, her voice cutting through the noise of approaching combat. "We're not defending, we're attacking." Cohen stared at her as if she'd lost her mind. "Lieutenant, there are 24 of them and maybe 8 of us with weapons. That's not tactics. That's suicide." "No," Noa replied, her blue eyes showing the kind of cold calculation that made Sayeret Matkal operators legendary. "That's exactly the kind of odds we train for." She moved to the supply closet that every base cafe was required to maintain and opened what appeared to be a standard emergency kit. Inside, beneath the bandages and fire extinguishers, was equipment that definitely wasn't part of standard issue. Flashbang grenades, breaching charges, and a compact submachine gun that had never appeared on any inventory list. "You've been running an armed cafe for 6 months, Cohen said, his voice filled with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "I've been running a hardened defensive position disguised as a cafe," Noa corrected. "And these terrorists just walked into a kill zone they don't know exists." The sound of the assault team was getting closer, perhaps 30 seconds before they reached the corridor where the base personnel were sheltering. Noa activated the first breaching charge with a timer set for exactly 25 seconds. "When that charge blows," she told Cohen, "they're going to think we're trying to bring down the building. They'll pull back to regroup, which gives us exactly 40 seconds to hit them while they're out of position. And if your timing is off?" Noa checked the action on the submachine gun with movements that spoke of years of familiarity with such weapons. "Then the most beautiful barista in Israeli military history is about to become the deadliest." The explosion shook the building again, but this time it was followed by something the assault team hadn't expected. The sound of a Sayeret Matkal operator going on the offensive against an enemy that had just learned they weren't hunting sheep. They were trapped in a cage with a wolf. The breaching charge detonated exactly on schedule, sending a shockwave through the building that momentarily disrupted the assault team's coordinated advance. In that crucial window of confusion, Lieutenant Noa Goldstein ceased to be a defender and became something far more dangerous. A Sayeret Matkal operator with tactical initiative. She moved through the smoke-filled corridor like a predator who had suddenly realized her prey was trapped. The submachine gun in her hands, a custom-modified Uzi Pro that had never appeared on any official inventory, felt as natural as the espresso machine she'd operated for 6 months. Both were tools of her trade, instruments she'd mastered through countless hours of training. The first hostile she encountered was a bearded operative who had separated from his squad to investigate the explosion. He turned toward the sound of her approach just in time to see muzzle flash. A brief illumination of platinum blonde hair and ice blue eyes, before 3 rounds center mass ended his participation in the assault. "Contact! Contact!" his squad leader shouted in Arabic, but the warning came too late. Noa was already moving to her next position, using the building's layout, which she'd memorized during 6 months of careful observation, to stay ahead of their response. The assault team had trained for resistance from conventional military personnel, soldiers who would establish defensive positions and attempt to hold ground until reinforcements arrived. They hadn't prepared for someone who understood that the best defense was a perfectly executed offense, delivered when and where the enemy least expected it. Noa appeared from a service corridor that the assault team's intelligence hadn't properly mapped, engaging 2 more hostiles with precision fire before vanishing back into the building's infrastructure. Her beauty was unchanged. Even in combat, her features remained perfect, her movements graceful, but her blue eyes now held the cold calculation of a professional killer who had found her element. "She's moving through the walls," one of the assault team leaders reported over comms that Noah's enhanced hearing easily picked up. "Single operator, extremely mobile, knows the building layout better than we do." What they didn't understand was that Lieutenant Noa Goldstein hadn't just memorized the building. She had spent 6 months turning it into a weapons platform specifically designed for this moment. Every sight line had been calculated, every piece of cover assessed, every tactical advantage cataloged and prepared. The cafe's supply closets contained more than emergency medical kits. The maintenance panels hid weapons caches positioned at strategic intervals throughout the building. Even the seemingly decorative mirrors had been placed to provide complete visual coverage of approach routes that hostile forces might use. For 6 months, while serving coffee and smiling at soldiers who barely acknowledged her existence, Noa had been building the most sophisticated defensive network any base had ever seen. And now, with 24 professional killers trapped inside her domain, she was about to demonstrate exactly why Sayeret Matkal operators were considered the deadliest soldiers in the world. "Tango down, Corridor 3, she reported to Sergeant Major Cohen over her concealed comm unit, moving to intercept squad advancing on the personnel shelter. "How many?" Cohen's voice carried a mixture of awe and disbelief. 6 confirmed eliminations, estimated 18 remaining, Noa replied, her voice steady as she reloaded while moving between positions. "They're beginning to realize they're not hunting. They're being hunted." Through the building's ventilation system, she could hear the assault team leader calling for extraction support. The professional confidence in their voices was beginning to crack as they realized their carefully planned operation was unraveling against a single defender who seemed to anticipate their every move. What they couldn't know was that Noa wasn't just defending. She was implementing a tactical scenario she'd run hundreds of times in training simulations. Solo operator, overwhelmed by superior numbers, turning environmental knowledge into a force multiplier. This was exactly the kind of impossible situation that Sayeret Matkal spent years preparing for. The next phase of her counterattack would require precision timing and nerves of steel. She needed to eliminate the remaining threats while ensuring no friendly casualties, all while preventing the assault team from either escaping to regroup or accomplishing their primary objective of maximum destruction. In other words, she needed to do exactly what she'd been trained to do: the impossible. "Sergeant Major," she said, checking the timer on her final breaching charge, "in 30 seconds, I need you to get everyone as far from the eastern wall as possible." "What are you planning?" Noah's smile was beautiful, deadly, and absolutely terrifying. "I'm going to remind these terrorists why they should have stayed home." The psychological warfare had begun the moment the assault team realized they were being systematically eliminated by a single operator. What had started as a confident military operation was deteriorating into a nightmare scenario where their overwhelming numerical advantage meant nothing against someone who fought by rules they didn't understand. Noa could hear it in their communications, the growing panic, the breakdown of tactical discipline, the desperate attempts to reestablish control over a situation that was spiraling beyond their comprehension. They had come expecting to massacre defenseless personnel. Instead, they were being hunted through a building that had become their tomb. "Alpha Team, report status," the assault leader demanded over radio frequencies that Noa monitored through equipment hidden in the cafe's sound system. "Alpha Team is down," came the shaky reply. "All 6 eliminated by single operator. Female, blonde, moving through areas not on our intelligence maps." The silence that followed spoke volumes. 24 professional killers had been reduced to 12, and none of them could explain how a barista had become their executioner. Noa moved through the building's service passages like a ghost, using maintenance corridors that her cover identity had given her legitimate reasons to access over the past 6 months. Every panel she'd cleaned, every system she'd maintained, had actually been preparation for this moment, creating a 3-dimensional battlefield where she held every advantage. The next hostile she encountered was attempting to set explosive charges on the communications center. He never saw her coming. The flash suppressor on her weapon ensured that his squad mates heard only the whisper of subsonic ammunition, followed by the sound of a body hitting the floor. "Bravo team, radio check," came the increasingly frantic call from their commander. No response, because Bravo team was no longer capable of responding. What the assault team couldn't understand was that they weren't fighting a defender. They were being systematically eliminated by someone who had spent years perfecting the art of impossible odds combat. Every Sayeret Matkal operator trained for scenarios exactly like this. Outnumbered, outgunned, with no backup and no retreat possible. The difference was that most operators trained for survival. Noa had been trained to win. She paused at a junction between corridors, using a concealed mirror to assess the position of the remaining hostiles. 8 left, now clustered in defensive positions, abandoning their original mission in favor of simple survival. Their training told them to maintain tactical formation, but their fear was overriding their discipline. Perfect. Through her earpiece, she could hear Sergeant Major Cohen coordinating the evacuation of remaining personnel to hardened positions. His voice carried newfound respect and a healthy dose of awe as he reported her tactical achievements to base command. "Sir, the situation is unprecedented," Cohen was saying. "Single operator has eliminated 16 hostiles in 23 minutes. The assault force is retreating to defensive positions, requesting immediate backup for Lieutenant Goldstein." Noa smiled at that. After 6 months of being invisible, she was finally being seen for what she truly was, the deadliest woman in the Israeli military. But the mission wasn't complete. 8 hostiles remained, and they were now positioned near the base's ammunition storage facility. If they decided to go out in a blaze of destruction, they could take half the installation with them. That was unacceptable. "Sergeant Major," she reported quietly, "remaining hostiles are consolidating near Building 7. That's too close to the ammunition depot for comfort." "Rules of engagement?" Cohen asked. Noa checked her remaining ammunition, 1 magazine plus the partial in her weapon, and considered the tactical reality. 8 professional killers with military equipment positioned in defensible terrain, with access to enough explosives to level the building, against 1 Sayeret Matkal operator with limited ammunition and the element of surprise. "Standard ROE," she replied, beginning her approach to the final engagement. "No survivors." What the remaining assault team members didn't know was that they had just triggered the final phase of a tactical scenario that Lieutenant Noa Goldstein had trained for since she was 22 years old. Total elimination of hostile forces while preventing collateral damage to friendly personnel and critical infrastructure. In other words, they were about to discover exactly why Sayeret Matkal operators were considered the most elite soldiers in the world, and why the beautiful Barista they had dismissed as a soft target was actually the most dangerous person any of them had ever encountered. The hunt was almost over. The ammunition depot of an Israeli military base was not a place where firefights were supposed to happen. The building contained enough explosive ordnance to crater half the installation, making it the one location where even a single stray bullet could turn tactical victory into catastrophic disaster, which was exactly why the remaining 8 hostiles had chosen it for their final stand. Noa approached Building 7 with the methodical precision of someone who understood that the next few minutes would determine whether this mission ended in triumph or tragedy. Through her scope, she could see the assault team had positioned themselves with tactical intelligence, covering approaches, establishing overlapping fields of fire, using the threat of collateral damage as their ultimate defensive weapon. "Lieutenant?" Sergeant Major Cohen's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Intelligence reports these hostiles are carrying thermite charges. If they detonate those in proximity to the ammunition stores, the entire eastern section of the base becomes a smoking crater," Noa finished. "I understand the stakes, Sergeant Major." What she didn't say was that this scenario, protecting critical infrastructure while eliminating hostiles in close proximity, was exactly the kind of impossible tactical problem that Sayeret Matkal spent years training to solve. The margin for error was essentially zero, but zero margins were where elite operators proved their worth. Through her surveillance equipment, she could monitor the hostile communications. Their Arabic was becoming increasingly frantic as they realized their extraction helicopters weren't coming, their backup teams had been eliminated, and their carefully planned operation had become a desperate fight for survival against a single Israeli operator who seemed to anticipate their every move. "Alpha Command, this is Scorpion Leader," their commander was saying into his radio. "Mission is compromised. Repeat, mission is compromised. Requesting immediate extraction at Rally Point 7. The silence that followed confirmed what Noa had suspected. This wasn't just a terrorist attack. This was a state-sponsored operation, and whoever had sent these men was now cutting them loose to avoid international consequences, which meant they would fight to the death rather than face capture and interrogation. Noa began her approach using a route that hadn't existed on any building plans until she'd created it during 6 months of maintenance work. A ventilation shaft that connected to the building's roof access, modified to provide a perfect sniper's nest with clear sight lines to the ammunition depot's interior. The ascent required absolute silence. Any sound would alert the hostiles below and potentially trigger the exact scenario she was trying to prevent. But climbing in complete silence while carrying weapons and tactical equipment was just another skill that Sayeret Matkal operators mastered as a matter of routine. Emerging onto the roof, Noa found herself with perfect visibility of the hostile positions. 8 men, well-armed and professional, positioned to defend against ground assault, but not adequately prepared for an attack from above. Classic tactical oversight. They were thinking like conventional soldiers, not like special forces operators. Through her scope, she could see the thermite charges positioned throughout the building's interior. Military-grade equipment designed to burn through steel and concrete at temperatures exceeding 2,500 degrees Celsius. If detonated simultaneously, they would trigger a chain reaction that would consume the entire ammunition depot. But thermite charges required precise timing to be effective, and the detonation systems they were using, commercial mining equipment rather than military ordnance, had a vulnerability that Noa's technical training had taught her to recognize. A single precisely placed shot into the primary detonation controller would create an electrical feedback loop that would disable the entire system. The shot would have to be perfect. Distance: 47 meters at a downward angle. Target size: approximately 3 centimeters square. Margin for error: 0. And she would have to make the shot while hostile forces were actively searching for her position. Noa settled into her shooting stance, her breathing automatically adjusting to the controlled rhythm that snipers used for precision work. Around her, the morning air was still, providing perfect atmospheric conditions for accurate fire. Through her scope, she watched the hostile commander checking his watch, clearly working to a timeline that meant the thermite charges would detonate regardless of tactical considerations. She had perhaps 90 seconds before this became an unsolvable problem. Time to remind everyone why Sayeret Matkal snipers were considered the best in the world. Her finger found the trigger as her crosshair settled on the detonation controller. One shot, one chance. The lives of everyone on the base depending on 3 centimeters of target precision. Lieutenant Noa Goldstein, the invisible barista, prepared to take the most important shot of her career. The shot broke at exactly 0923 hours, echoing across the Israeli military base with the sharp crack of precision fire. 47 meters below, the detonation controller exploded in a shower of sparks and shattered electronics, its destruction triggering exactly the electrical feedback loop that Noa had calculated would disable the entire thermite array. For a moment, the 8 remaining hostiles stared at their useless explosive charges in complete incomprehension. Their ultimate weapon, the threat that was supposed to guarantee their escape, had been neutralized by a single impossible shot from an operator they couldn't even see. That moment of shock was all Lieutenant Noa Goldstein needed. Moving with the fluid grace that had made her legendary, even among Sayeret Matkal's elite ranks, she transitioned from sniper to assault specialist in seconds. The rappelling line she'd prepared during her rooftop approach allowed her to descend directly into the ammunition depot, landing behind cover before any of the hostiles could react to her new position. What followed wasn't a firefight. It was a demonstration of why Sayeret Matkal operators were considered the deadliest soldiers in the world. 8 professional killers with military training and superior equipment were systematically eliminated by a single blonde woman who moved like death itself. Beautiful and terrible, and absolutely unstoppable. When the shooting stopped, Lieutenant Noa Goldstein stood alone among the wreckage of what had been a 24-man assault force. Her uniform was torn, her face smudged with smoke and dust. But her blue eyes were clear, and her platinum hair still caught the sunlight streaming through the ammunition depot's windows. She was, quite simply, the most beautiful woman any of the arriving backup forces had ever seen. She was also the most lethal. "Base secure," she reported into her radio. Her voice steady despite having just accomplished what military analysts would later call the most spectacular single-operator defense in modern warfare history. All hostiles eliminated. No friendly casualties. Ammunition depot is safe. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of helicopters, Israeli military this time, not terrorist extraction, arriving to secure the scene that no longer needed securing. Sergeant Major Cohen was the first to reach her, his expression mixing awe, gratitude, and the kind of respect that soldiers reserved for legends they had witnessed in the making. "Lieutenant," he said formally, then stopped, unable to find words adequate for what he had just witnessed. "It's okay, Sergeant Major," Noa said with the same sweet smile she'd used while serving coffee for 6 months. "You can still call me the barista. After all, I'll be back to making lattes tomorrow morning." But they both knew that wasn't true. The invisible woman who had served coffee while conducting the most sophisticated intelligence operation in Israeli military history would never be invisible again. The story of the beautiful blonde barista who had single-handedly eliminated an entire assault force would spread through military circles around the world, becoming the kind of legend that inspired new generations of Special Forces operators. 3 hours later, as Noa sat in the debriefing room answering questions from intelligence officers who could barely believe their own reports, she received a secure communication from the highest levels of Israeli command. The message was brief. "Well done, Lieutenant. When you're ready for your next assignment, we have something that will make this morning look like a training exercise." Noa smiled, the same radiant expression that had charmed soldiers for 6 months while she planned their protection. Outside, construction crews were already beginning repairs to the cafe that had been her cover, her fortress, and ultimately the stage for her triumph. Because tomorrow morning, the most dangerous barista in military history would be back behind the espresso machine, serving coffee with a smile and waiting for the next impossible mission that only she could accomplish. After all, the best legends were the ones that hid in plain sight, beautiful and deadly, and ready to remind the world that sometimes the most extraordinary people were the ones everyone chose not to see. What they didn't know about Lieutenant Noa Goldstein could have filled a classified file. But what everyone knew now was that underestimating a beautiful woman who made excellent coffee was the last mistake any enemy would ever make. The barista was back in business,